Welcome back to Badger Radio. It's a classic. It's a classic song from that 1984 album, Born in the USA. A little Bruce Springsteen. I remember working at the movie theater at Knollwood Mall, and seeing the advertisements for Born in the USA, and just perked my soul. It was just fantastic.
Had you heard the songs?
No, I mean it was no. I mean they were they were brand new. I mean it was all happening.
Is that the first album you ever bought?
It was all happening right then. No, well, no. I had some albums around my house from my my sister. I had an older sister, and so there were some albums kind of around the house, but. That was kind of the first album that I was 17 when that came out, and like that other music, I was just younger, that now I've really gotten into all the stuff from the late 70s, but that was kind of the album that was sort of mine. Like it came out with a big release, and big concerts and all the rest of that in my life and as a teenager, and so it was very framing. And I get teased all the time by the youngsters. There's all these people in their 20s that because I'm in Bruce Springsteen, they think that like I'm some kind of an old man or something. That's
middle-ager.
Yeah. Oh, they're just like, really? Is he still alive? I mean, they're just not nice. And I just it's their loss, right?
That's right.
So today is the high holiday in the religious community for the Jewish folks. We talked to the rabbi yesterday, and I said, "Hey, Joseph, this is a couple days ago. Hey, Joseph, can you come on the show on Wednesday?" And Joseph said, "No, it's Yom Kippur. I can't come on the show today. It's the Day of Atonement celebration, and I'm going to be at the synagogue." So I said, "Well, could you phone it in from the synagogue?" To which the rabbi, I think, said, yeah. I think he said something about me in Yiddish, too. He said, no, I wouldn't feel comfortable on the Day of Atonement, where I'm supposed to be atoning for sin, calling into your radio show, because he kind of takes it as a Sabbath. So then we chatted with him yesterday about this whole Day of Atonement. And so he said, well, in Jewish community currently, and I make that little caveat because for many of us, we've tapped into the sense that Christianity has a Jewish origin. Christianity is a part of a Jewish narrative before it takes on its own identity in the first and really more so in the second, third, and fourth centuries. But it has those origins. But Judaism has changed a lot in the intervening 2,000 years. So the kind of Judaism that people are living today is not always rooted singularly in the Judaism of the first century or of the before the Common Era Judaism. So, in fact, Judaism through history has had many ideations to it. So anyway, the kind of Jewish culture and life that people live now might reflect the holidays, the 7 high holidays of Judaism, but they're different, right? They're a different versions. So he was saying, well, what you currently do is he would spend the day at the temple, Israel, and that you have 2 kinds of sins to atone for on the Day of Atonement. One of the sins that you've committed against God, so I'm recapping the rabbi. These are the sins that you commit against God, so you say to God, I'm sorry for those sins, I will commit not to doing those again. Free me, heal me, complete me, take those sins from me. And God's committed to do so, he said. But the sin that you've committed against another person requires that you make that confession to that other person.
What if they're not at the temple?
Well, then they call. And I didn't ask this to the rabbi yesterday, but I've asked him before on this. He said, for Jewish people, their phones are ringing all day long. Yeah, all day long. Their phones are ringing. Yeah, atoning. People making apologies and making these things, right? And there's a really great practice in there. I want to start with that, right? The people in the 12-step communities know this. This is called taking inventory of your life. And then making restitution with other people, going to people, and making things right. And I think that's an essential human practice, one that I'm not very good at. I tend to minimize things. So if someone wrongs me, and then they apologize, I tend to be someone who says, "Oh, it's okay."
Right.
Right. Well, I mean, if I were to have ever, in fact, I've said that to the rabbi before. The rabbi has said, "Doug, I need to apologize. Doug, I need to apologize to you for what I did." He does this thing. And it's something that I found really to be. And I said, "Oh, Rabbi, that's okay." He goes, "No, no, 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 no. It's not okay. It's not okay.
So
If
he
it was
won't let
okay,
ya.
if it was okay, I wouldn't be apologizing." Like, he's really good at that, right? Like in that Jewish community, at least with him, really a deep understanding of your capacity to fail someone and your ability to own the fact that you failed that person, built on the expectation that that person will free you from that new obligation you created when you wronged them. Right? So when you in relational dynamics, in relational theology, when you offend someone, wrong someone, sin against someone, you've now created a new obligation to them. So now you have to take care of that new obligation in
I
asking
think
for
we
forgiveness.
rarely apologize for things that we really ought to apologize for.
Right.
We spend a lot of time apologizing for dumb things like, "Oh, I'm sorry I bumped into you."
Right, yeah.
Or we say sorry a lot, or maybe not you, but some people. Maybe me.
Finish your thought.
Say
I
sorry
don't
for
think you were
things
trying to
that
insult me there.
really we shouldn't be sorry for. Like,
Right.
"Oh, I'm sorry you feel bad." I mean, it's not
Right.
really. This isn't what the Day of Atonement is really
I
about. It's
don't
about
think
really
so.
taking stock of where you have, and that's very painful. It's
Yeah.
hard to do. And I don't think there's really, our culture of sorry or I'm sorry, or people who are quick to say I'm sorry aren't necessarily any better at doing that than somebody who has
Yep.
a hard time doing it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And sometimes I don't appreciate it when people apologize for things that they shouldn't really apologize for. Sometimes I tell them,
Like
please
they're
don't
taking
apologize.
responsibility for
Yeah, I'm
something
like,
that's
that's
not your thing.
Yeah, or please don't apologize to me that you were late because your kid is sick. Like, I don't want you to apologize for
Right.
that.
You can
it's
just
not,
tell me that that's why you were late, and
Yeah. You
there's
can't
no
help.
additional obligation that you've earned.
Yeah,
that you have to
I don't
fix.
like, and maybe I get upset because I try so hard not to do that. Like, I too often take, or I have had a history of taking responsibility for things that don't belong to me. So
You know what I refer to that as? The Forrest Gump effect. You remember the movie Forrest Gump, where
Yes.
he shows up in every scene, of important things that happen? Like somehow he gets himself inserted and everything.
Yeah.
There's people that have that ability to somehow in their mind, like, insert themselves into every circumstance, right?
Yeah.
Like, how did you get in the picture of that? How are you part
I
of that?
suppose it's kind of a funny hubris.
Yeah, so that's
to
my
think that
little-
it's always your fault.
Yeah, that like you had
It's
something to
kind
do
of-
with it. Well, so this Day of Atonement is a powerful. There's a powerful human requirement there, right? To own your life, to own it before God, and to own it before your own conscience, and to own it before another person, right? So that's a really great thing. The problem is, for me, I just don't think it should have anything to do with this word atonement.
Okay.
Because for me, that word atonement has a Christian meaning that comes from the Jewish history, but has really taken on a life all of its own. And in Christian theology, atonement is spoken of as this one-time action that Jesus was engaged in that somehow had some effect on the economy of God's interaction with humankind or creation, and that atoning sacrifice of Jesus' life happened, and then it completed the atonement requirement. So there's a completion of atonement. He was the final sacrifice, the last atonement, this kind of thing. So then atonement now is not an interpersonal relational dynamic and a personal spiritual dynamic that someone has to come to grips with. It's this notion and concept that God and humanity had some raging battle, and Jesus had to fix that raging battle. Right? And I just think that's no way to tell the story of Jesus. I think it doesn't comport with the
So you'd like
the
to
story.
take back the word atonement.
I would like to drop the whole notion.
It's too tainted now.
It's
Like,
too tainted, yes.
you have
And,
to-
and I even think that in Jewish community, if you go back in what we can find in the Israelite community and in the burgeoning Judean communities, I think atonement really did carry a sensibility that God or the gods had to be appeased, and that there's an unpleased God who is temperamental and needs to have things made right, or
and kind of stupid, right? I mean, like
a bit.
we can trick God,
Right.
just pretend that we're wearing Jesus's clothes. Isn't that kind of how it's set up in church?
Oh, isn't that interesting? Like a covering or something? Like
Yeah,
you're in a costume,
you're
like
wearing Jesus's little
where God's like, are you
crucifixion
Batman?
outfit.
No, I'm really Bruce Wayne, but I'm in the Jesus outfit. So
I'm
no,
dressed
I'm Jesus.
up in this.
I'm clothed in this, right?
Yeah.
To borrow that
I'm
language.
still a piece of garbage, but never mind
yeah,
that.
underneath it all,
Yeah.
right? Well, and see, this is what it does, because then in Christian theology, you have these other words that are elevated to the same conversation with atonement. So you have justification, righteousness, purification. These kinds of words in which you say, well, there was one atonement that justified us before God, but the righteousness of God then is something we have to work for. Or if you're in other traditions, you switch those around and you say, well, the righteousness of God was given to us, but we have to be justified daily by our activities, or however you want to put that together. But however you do it, you end up in this capricious circumstance where the consequence of atonement theory is if God is on your side or not. And that's what's troubling to me about it. I'm not bothered by the notions of someone should come to grips with the wrong that they have done and how that has fractured their ability to live in wholeness and oneness with God and with humanity. Yes, we should. But I think the notion that God is of this other type that has to be appeased in order to tolerate, put up with, or, lo and behold, love humanity is really troubling. And so all the conversation that comes up in Christian theology about atonement isn't so much about this interpersonal life that one lives where, like, as Jesus said to, in the Gospels, Jesus is quoted as saying, look, when you go to the temple, if you haven't, and you want to give your offerings to God, and you haven't taken care of the violation in your relationship with your brother or sister or friend down the road,
Go do that.
you should go do that and then come back and do this. Yeah, okay, I get that. No, but that's not where Christian theology has taken the idea of atonement. They've made it into this, Christian theology has made it into this, like, cosmic exchange that happens, right? And once it gets into that cosmic exchange, you now have God not in the midst of all this, but God sort of removed from humanity and dealing with this, in the books somewhere,
I think it's disempowering to people. You think it leaves people?
I think it's built around the notion that God and humans are in constant agitation with one another, right? And that's what really, that's the part that really gets me, is if you need to have your sins atoned for in the sense of so that God is not your enemy and God is your friend, I think that's just beginning from the wrong
I think it's part of what contributes to the sense of continual separation between humanity and God. Like on a day-to-day basis, we're all thinking things that we shouldn't think here and there. We do something, we lose our temper, whatever. Like there's a continual moment-to-moment need for atonement. And so then there's this separation and then this coming together separation. I think it might contribute to that sense of a fractured relationship with God. That if we could dispense with that, the idea that God can be close to us all the time, and maybe we're not aware of it because of what we're doing, and we need to, say
yeah. And
sorry.
this is and this is the thing that I wanted to chat with the rabbi about as well, right? Is because I get that on certain holidays you wouldn't do certain things, right? So okay, whatever. Like, I don't know, you don't work on Christmas, or he wouldn't work on the high holiday. But that sits right at the edge of God being hard to please. And it's really easy for us in religious traditions and in religious systems especially to slide into that, to slide into the category of believing that, well, just be careful because God's a little finicky on some things, and if we don't get this right, we want to make sure that the forgiveness of God comes in full measure. Like it all has the makings in my head of like some God that's a crazy old finicky selfish guy that barely wants to give this, and if you do it just right, it's like Willy Wonka or something. Right. Like you got to go through the whole factory just right, Charlie, if you think that you're gonna get the prize at the end. And that notion, and that's why I have a hard time with atonement category. Because it seems to come from this root in a lot of us that's not about, hey, you know what I'm growing, I'm changing, I'm trying to become a better person and a more alive and spiritual person, and some of these regrets and this pain and all that stuff that I've caused, I got to get over that because I want to be freed from that so that I can be so I can live without any obligation to anyone else, and I can just live in freedom and wholeness. Great, that's what we all ought to do. But if hovering over that is this theory of atonement, no matter which one you pick, and I have friends that write books on this and everything on different
flavors of atonement.
All the flavors of atonement, and when I'm being particularly snarky, I'm like, well, the problem I have with atonement theory is that there's such a thing as atonement theory, especially in Christianity.
Well, I just had a new thought about this I've never had before.
Oh.
There's a idea in psychoanalytic criticism, or like in Freudian criticism, of displacement, that sometimes if there's something that's painful about yourself, some kind of thing, that you put it on someone else. I'm wondering if our own flakiness, our own finickiness, that we've put that on God because we don't want to deal with it in ourselves, and so thereby it's this, because we all have people like that in our lives that are very easy to displease. Like we all know those people. How close we are to them maybe depends on any number of things. Like I try to distance myself from people like that because it's uncomfortable.
Because you think, so you're saying that we as people, we tend to become these kind of finicky, selfish with our grace.
I think that those are qualities that we
transpose that
have.
onto our thoughts that God must be this way too, or even more this way.
Maybe it's just an idea, and that we've displaced it onto God, and then we don't have to deal. The reason they say that people do this in psychoanalytic criticism is that then you don't have to deal with it yourself. Like it's your consciousness's way of distancing yourself from painful things.
Isn't that interesting?
So it's just a thought. I mean, it's a human tendency. We're anthropomorphizing, whatever that word is.
Anthropomorphizing?
That all the time. So of course
which to the uneducated means giving human qualities to a non-human item. God or a car or a cat or something. Yes.
Yeah, I should just say that since I can't even say the word. But
right. If you're not using fancy words to brag, and you kind of lose bragging rights when you mispronounce the fancy word.
It's the first one that came to my mind. So, but I think that when we look inward, we know that to be true of ourselves, and that it's hard. It's really hard work, and that in some ways it would make it even harder to realize if God is ever present, ever close, ever loving. I mean, that's how the kind of parent I want to be. I don't want to be one of those displeased kinds of parent, but my kids, in their own youthfulness and trying their developmental issues or whatever, sometimes they make things harder than they really have to be. Like I'm there and loving. I'm not perfect. I'm no God. Yeah. But I'm a bit more mature and a bit more present and available to them than they are to me sometimes. And yet they don't see it that way and experience it that way. And I wonder how much that is maybe with that. Like if we would just get over it and say God's always here, always loves us, always available, then we'd have to get down to the tough work.
Yeah, and see, I think you're tapping into something, because the issue is not, do we always, in our frailty, in our limitations, in our living out the future of other people's histories, right? What they've done to us, they've done in us, biologically, genetically, socially. That all affects how we live now, and it makes us live unavailable to the best version all the time, right? the question is, what's the consequence of that? The problem with Christian theology's view of atonement, in my view, is that we tend to make this ultimate cataclysmic result of these things, right? So, like, and this is where Christian theology gets really bad, right? Once you have experienced the benefits of the atoning work of Jesus, then you're in no matter what you do. It's kind of you just got to get that one-time payment, then it's all taken care of. Then you just work out your salvation in some variety of way.
Hide the badness that you do. It has to go underground, because you shouldn't be doing that. If you're already atoned for and you've already been perfected,
yes,
you're already a new creation in Christ, right?
All this stuff, yeah.
You have to, all that stuff that you're grappling with that isn't quite finished in you yet or whatever, you have to hide it.
Yeah.
I mean, we know people, we've lived in those communities,
right?
Yeah.
All the time.
And it's a horrible place to live, because you can't really deal with stuff. You're gonna get
If you brought it up, yes,
yeah.
there would be great consequence for it. So and that's the thing, right? Is that atonement theory tends to make the consequence so high. What I want to argue for is the way that we ought to think about failure and sin and all this is that it's not that big a deal, right? And so when I say that, I know people. I mean, it makes Protestants and Catholics that are like, oh, finally he just said it, right?
We just lost 500 listeners.
Yeah, right. And I put this. I wrote about this in a Christianity Worth Believing, but that, like, look, sin is not that big a deal. Now, I'm not alone in that chorus. Paul, the first century writer, where I'm currently reading the book of Romans, because we're going to do it for the sermon series.
Oh, yeah.
At Solomon's Porch, yeah. So last night we were reading this, and in one of the many and convoluted portions of the book of Romans, which I like the book of Romans a lot, but it is not a straight line. It's nowhere close to systematic theology. It is a lot of things, but anyway,
a web at best.
Yeah, a web at best. And in one of the portions, he hits this little crescendo, which I remember hearing early on in my own Christian experience, and probably has kept me in it this whole time, which is this whole notion that there is nothing that can separate us from the love of God. Not height, nor depth, nor nakedness, nor pain, nor sin. Like, sin is not bigger than God. So sin is not that big of a deal. And I think what we should do is own it more like the rabbi does and say, look, I sinned against you. And when I go like, oh, it's no big deal, he's like, no, you're making it a bigger deal. You're acting like sin is this really huge thing, and you're having to say, no, what you did doesn't meet that, doesn't reach that, right? Instead, he says, no, it was a big deal, but we can solve it. We can fix it. We can take care of it. So in that sense, he actually makes it less of a big deal.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way we ought to think about sin. Is yes, sin is about frailty. Sin is about incongruency with the life that we want to live, as opposed to it is this massively complex theory and system that we really have to make sure we understand right and perform right. And then religion that has wrapped itself around that has this whole delivery system of the goods of God's forgiveness that has to happen in a certain place, in a certain environment. So and this is part of my non-religious impulses, is when I hear someone say, like the rabbi did, hey, I can't be on your radio show because it's the Day of Atonement. I'm like, well, what's so bad with a radio show? Like, why is that how does that disrupt the Day of Atonement? And that feels to me like somebody who goes into a church and someone says, well, did you say the right thing? Or did the person who gave you the communion that somehow is connected to the forgiveness, were you sincere in your heart about it? Like any of these like conditions. And I don't know a view of atonement in Christian theology that doesn't also come with a really complicated system that you have to utilize in order to be the beneficiary of said atonement. So that's why when, on the high holiday of all this, I say, for the Jewish community, I say, I'm good for them. It's a good thing. It's a great practice. We should all be more straightening up those crooked paths that we have walked. But
I love the notion of let's just tone it down a little bit.
Let's atone it down.
Yeah.
Cute.
So my son a couple weeks ago in his class at Solomon's Porch, his Sunday night class, he was really disruptive. And the teachers talked to us afterwards. Yeah, he was really disruptive. And we talked to him and the teachers afterwards, and we said, well, seems to us like you took a lot of energy out of your teachers' lives.
Nice.
We were saying this to my son. They prepared these things. They wanted to do these things with you and have a lot of fun, and made it hard for them to do it. So we think you should give back to them. So he's going to go work it out in their yard this weekend.
Oh.
We did this once before, and it was great because it was like, hey, look, this happened. We got to move on, but also give back a little bit.
That's right.
I think that's empowering and helps him feel a sense of I'm moving on. I don't have to feel like I'm a bad kid.
Right.
Or
it was all taken care of. It was dealt with, and it didn't cost me my life.
Nope. But yet at the same time, we can all do things to make things better. I feel so often as a kid and as a young adult, I felt like I could never do anything to make it better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes sometimes from relationships where if you have somebody where they're displeased a lot with you, whether it's God or anybody, if you have a close relationship with somebody where you don't ever feel like you can please them, then you feel it feels fatalistic. You can't ever do anything to make it better. All of us can do things. There are some harms that you can cause where you can never restore it, but most of the time, most of the stuff, you can do something. A little bit can go a long way.
Yes. Yeah,
and
I
so
think you're right.
I like this idea of just keeping it a little bit more lower key.
Yeah.
And looking at then ways to try to relationally restore if there was something that was lost, to try to restore it.
I like that a lot. I'm going to leave this segment with this little blessing from this song called "Reason to Believe."
Okay.
I've ever told you my "Reason to Believe" story. It's a Bruce Springsteen song. So it's this terrific little song with 5 vignettes about people who are in a really bad situation, but they still find some reason to believe. And he's got this little refrain that goes, "It struck me kind of funny and seemed funny, sir, to me, how at the end of every hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe." It's just really... So anyway, I like this song a lot. It was on the Nebraska album, and there's lots of conversation about what this song means and so on. But at the concert that I was at a couple years ago, we were in the front row. You get to watch the whole thing happen, right? The whole concert. And when this song starts to play... Springsteen walks over and gets this big sponge that they use to sponge themselves off. And he takes this sponge of water, and he's got it in his hand, and he's playing this harmonica during this one part where there's this crescendo of, at the end of every hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe. And he takes the sponge of water and starts shaking it on the crowd, like baptizing them. So people are singing at the end of every hard-earned day, and he's baptizing them as people who are now in the faith of those who believe. It's a really powerful sort of thing. So the opening line, I think, is quite catchy. It reads like this. "Seen a man standing over a dead dog lying by the highway in a ditch. He's looking down kind of puzzled, poking that dog with a stick. He's got his car door flung open. He's standing out on Highway 31. Like if he stood there long enough, that dog would get up and run. And it struck me kind of funny, sir, to me, that at the end of every hard-earned day, people find some reason to believe." Guy standing over a dead dog. So those of you listening to the podcast, I'll give you the whole thing. Those of you who are listening on the video, you have to go find it yourself. So we'll be back here after the break, and we're going to have a little conversation about something that happened to me this weekend.